Jonathan Oxer, and this is Walk Time blog number 5, I believe. Publication is not freedom. Now, I need to start this one with a little disclaimer saying that I am not a lawyer, obviously, and if you need actual legal advice, don't consult the internet. Talk to a real lawyer. So, what I'm going to talk about today is a little situation that's really been driven home to me over the last 6 months or so with a website that I run called shieldlist.org. And on this particular site I have a list of Arduino shields, and a while ago I added a flag in the database that specifies what license particular designs are released under, and that way you could look at a design and see whether it's open hardware or not, and know what your rights are in relation to it. And one of the things that really annoyed me is, well, there are two different sides of the same coin. One is people publishing a design and not providing any license information at all. They assume that because they have put their design up online, that makes it open source somehow and people can use it. So they go around saying, this is my open source design or open hardware design, and don't actually specify the license terms. The other is people seeing a design published online and assuming that because someone has gone to the trouble of creating it and putting it online, therefore it must be open and they can take that design and do whatever they like with it, even if there isn't a license published. And both sides of the coin are wrong. What this comes down to is copyright law. And I actually find copyright law really interesting, which just goes to show how much of a nerd I am. In fact, I wrote most of a chapter of one of my books about copyright and how it relates to created works online. So, let's look back at the history of it. Modern copyright law is based in an agreement that was reached in Bern in 1886. It's called the Bern Convention. Now, it's been revised and updated quite a number of times since then. But the interesting thing is that the result of the Bern Convention is one of the few pieces of law that is reasonably consistent all around the world. And what happened was that a number of parties got together in Bern in 1886 and decided on what they thought should be the fundamental basis of copyright law. And each signatory to the Bern Convention was then required to implement law within their own country to uphold the principles of that agreement. They didn't necessarily have to be exactly the same, but they had some fundamental precepts that had to be honoured. And one of the fundamental things, and this is really what is the basis of this discussion today, is that it was driven by a French concept, and I'm going to totally muck this up, but it's something like droit d'auteur, which is rights of the author, and that is quite different to how copyright law had been seen throughout England and the US and a number of other places up until that time. And the fundamental basis of it was that the author of a work has rights to decide what will happen with that work. Because this was so different to the way the UK and the US had been doing it for many years, it actually took about 100 years for those countries to become signatories to the Bern Convention, even though just about every other country in the world in the intervening time became part of the agreement. So what happened was that over a number of years, just about every country signed up, implemented laws that that implemented these particular precepts. And then in 1986, the US became a signatory to the Bern Convention at last, and around that time the World Trade Organization also introduced the basics of copyright into their agreement. And the thing is that this meant that by a backdoor action, essentially, pretty much every country in the world became accountable to the Bern Convention because they were already members of the World Trade Organization. So the result is that today, copyright law is very consistent around the world. There will be differences in duration of copyright and various things like that, but the fundamentals are still the same. So that was a big wandering history lesson. The result is that the right to control a created work rests with the author of that work from the time that it is laid down in a fixed form. And what that means is that if you have an idea in your head, even if it is the text of a book or your imagination of a particular painting or an idea of how an algorithm is going to work. Well, algorithms are an interesting one. I'll avoid that. It's a thorny issue. If it hasn't yet been fixed down, then you do not hold any copyright over it. You don't have any rights over it. An idea can't be copyright. But the moment that you fix it down, for example, by executing the painting or writing down the words in a fixed form, which could be on a computer disk, doesn't have to be pencil and paper, you then automatically own the copyright to that fixed work. Now, this is where you start to hear some weird things from people, particularly Americans who may have been used to the copyright law prior to 1986, when it came more in line with international standards. And you'll hear things like the requirement for marking something as being copyright, otherwise there is no copyright, and that's just blatantly false. The moment that a work is fixed, that is when copyright rests with the creator. There is actually no requirement for you to mark copyright on your work for copyright to be held. So the default position is you create it, then you own it. There is an exception, which is the work for hire exception, and this is to allow companies to operate essentially. If you are an employee of a company and you create something in the course of your employment with that company, then the copyright of the work rests with your employer. Now, if you are a subcontractor or something like that, the question may be a little more grey, and it may come down to the terms of your particular agreement. You can also vest copyright, or it's called copyright assignment, in someone else by signing over the rights to someone. So typically what happens in the case of a book is that the author will retain the copyright on the text itself because they wrote it, but they will sign an agreement with a publishing company which gives that publishing company distribution rights. So the publishing company can then produce the work, which is copyrighted the author, and they can print it and distribute it and do all of that sort of thing. So this brings us to magazines, which is a bit of an interesting issue. I hear fairly commonly people say, oh, this design was published in a magazine, therefore it's open. That's actually rubbish. The design will be copyright the original author or the magazine if they work directly for the publishing company, and nobody actually has any right to use it, which is a bizarre situation because if you think about, say, an electronics magazine, the general understanding is projects are published so that other people can replicate them. And there is this general feeling that if it's been published, you can then replicate it. The fact is that technically you can't, and it's not as if the publisher is going to stop you, because that's the purpose for which they're publishing it. But there really should be a license that says we give rights to people to produce this design for their own personal use, or whatever particular terms you want to put on it. And I don't think I've ever seen a magazine that does that, which is a bit disappointing. It'd be nice if they did. So the end result is, if a design is published on the internet or published in a magazine, that does not mean that anyone else has the right to actually do anything with it, unless those rights have been granted to you. So, if you are making a created work and you want to share it with the world, please make sure that you attach a license to it that allows other people to do that. Otherwise, you can be publishing your work and other people can't benefit from it. That you may think they can, they may think they can, but the law doesn't necessarily agree with you. So, once again, think carefully about how you license your work. See ya.